welcome Session Chair Justin Fletcher to the stage.
Ladies and gentlemen, aloha. My name is Justin Fletcher. It's my pleasure today to introduce Dr. Lindsay Millard, who's here with us today. Dr. Millard joins us from the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense, where she serves as the Principal Director for Space. Dr. Millard hails from the University of Michigan and Purdue, and will be joining us now to give a featured presentation. Dr. Millard.
All right, I have to commend him on the use of the word hail relative to Michigan. So for any alumnus in the room, there we go. So today we're going to nerd out a little bit. We're going to talk about technology. Specifically, I want to talk about how space technology development is competitive. I don't know if you've met our family in this room, but we are a competitive group. Not only as a technical community, but as a user community. We want the best technology, we want it right now, we want it commercialized, utilized, accessible. However, we won't for 1 second lift our foot off the gas to pursue what's next, what is not available and what is achievable. Now, those of you who know me tell me I am too optimistic. But I do argue that we pursue these space technologies because space is inspiring. And just when we solve one problem, we want to address the next challenge. We continuously want to see what's possible and what's next because we're always asking, how do we use space to better the world? How do we use space to make our daily lives better? So in my current position, I have the privilege of looking at both what is present and future to bridge what's ready now to what's next. I work for the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, that's Honorable Heidi Shyu, and the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Critical Technologies, that's Mr. Maynard Holliday, who's sitting with us today. These offices oversee the activities of DARPA, the Missile Defense Agency, Defense Laboratory and Engineering Center Enterprise, and the Undersecretariat staff focused on developing advanced technologies and capabilities. That's a lot. So suffice it to say, this community and how we as a department organize it is going to go a long way in defining the next decade of US space capabilities. And a lot of those folks, I would argue, are sitting in this room and listening in today. And it's an absolute pleasure to be speaking here on this island with you. So to that end, I'm going to focus my talk on the future. I am going to talk about what's next. Talk about some of the areas I see exponential versus maybe polynomial growth in. There will be more nerd jokes. And some areas that are driving innovation, and in some cases, at least to me, in surprising ways. So buckle up, we're going to dig into the science in the next 10 to 15 minutes. So when I am asked what is next in space, I don't know where your minds go, but mine, I cannot help but initially think of the moon. NASA has a mission for lunar and cislunar exploration, for which I am inordinately jealous. And the Department of Defense stands in support of NASA. So in other words, from a technology perspective, we're going to get their backs, as we always have, as the US returns to this region of space. More specifically, we seek to ensure a safe environment for humans and access for scientific endeavors in cislunar space by expanding our space situational awareness of the region. That is where DoD is focusing our efforts relative to technology in that regime. And so to understand what's going on in cislunar space, it requires an understanding of enormous volume of activities. I was the program manager for the Space Surveillance Telescope for a very short amount of time. And I used to say when it looked at the geobelt that you were looking at oceans and oceans of volume. Now I don't even have an analogy for cislunar space. It's just simply that big. It's simply incomprehensible. And so how are we going to do that? I'm going to dig in on 3 things. The first is multi-body dynamics. My background is in astrodynamics. I simply cannot help myself but talk about that, so we'll start there. The second is less reliance on satellite consumables. Some of you who work in and around the US military might know this as dynamic space operations. and the technologies to enable that moving forward. And then finally, I would be remiss to not talk about big data analytics and artificial intelligence, among other technology developments. We're going to run close to the Shannon limit in the amount of time I have, so here we go. Regarding multi-body dynamics, we are starting to see that satellite design itself, so size, weight, and power, and cost, SWaP-C, is starting to be influenced by orbital dynamics, especially as you start to send smaller spacecraft out near the moon. And what we're beginning to see, and I think beginning to implement in some areas, is four-body dynamics. So when you're designing a small satellite, everything is designed on the margins, and a small additional amount of SWaP can actually mean a big capability. So when you aim to do something exquisite on something small, starting to look at the orbit and including some of what you might consider smaller effects can actually have a huge impact on design. And so at the extreme risk of coining a new term, SWaP-O, right, is something that we're beginning to see. And if you don't need as much fuel to get where you need to go, you can bring more. So this is one of the technology areas, is looking fundamentally at the underlying dynamics in even beyond three-body dynamics in that regime. Regarding reducing reliance on consumables, dynamic space ops. So as we look to allow satellites to function longer and farther from Earth, we're literally expanding our horizons. We are looking at doing this through advanced and optimal control algorithms for EP engines. So when you have an EP engine, I'm preaching to the choir here, you can look really non-Keplerian. And there are specific cases, and there's a paper being presented here today, I think later this week, that looks at how do we really optimize based on electric propulsion and multi-body dynamics. We're pushing again on the margins. Where are we going to go, and what capabilities can we do if we can get more SWaP on smaller satellites out in different orbits? Alternative and more efficient energy sources. I'm at the risk again of being controversial, nuclear, right? How are we going to use nuclear engines in the future of all types? High compaction ratio solar arrays. How do you get a really, really big structure to fit in a really small space? And less power-hungry processing, and even on-orbit refueling. So we don't see DSO as just potentially on-orbit refueling, but many different things. A trade space that we can look after to move in this, again, giant volume of space. And finally, big data analytics. So the folks after me are going to talk a lot more in detail on this, and so I'm not going to go into it too much here. But what we want to try to do is allow smaller satellites, again, to perform bigger missions. So these satellites are likely going to be less capable, lower resolution, but potentially more data. So technologies that can leverage low-resolution data for high-resolution information, probably enabled by elements of artificial intelligence and machine learning, are not only being implemented now, but we're looking at increasing exponential use in the future in terms of the capabilities. So these are just a few of the technologies that will enable and impact the trade-offs of these satellite systems in the future. And so architecture design, in this case, informing the answer to the question, how are we going to see and do more than is possible right now? That's how we look to the future in terms of tech development from our office. So I mentioned data mining. I want to touch a little bit more on that, specifically related to trust. So as we see more big data, diverse data, AI, ML coming to look at large data streams all coming in the same place, if these are coming from commercial systems or perhaps from academic systems, things that are not qualified as trustworthy for specific applications, I believe that that's actually we can bring technology to bear on that problem. So to identify anomalous data streams and vet them for trustworthiness, we can separate measurements of the same object from different sensors at different angles and different modalities. And that allows you to, in some instances, have an understanding of how much you can trust a data stream and how much you can't. So as we continue to move towards the use of commercial space and other sources to and to diversify our data sources, I see this as an advantage. They're increasing technologies that can be employed to measure and manage trust in these eras. And again, these are available now, and they're only becoming more sophisticated. So meanwhile, we are driving autonomous technologies that are helping to increase knowledge and prediction of satellite location and how to quickly react to a change in the space environment. One example is the ability of a satellite to have a level of autonomy to maneuver out of the way of unanticipated debris. However, that's available right now, I would argue. But what about predicting where the debris is going to be located in the first place based on maneuvers of satellites months before, or estimating the presence of debris that is too small to be measured or sensed? So developing the models that enable the AI. Again, there's so many technology areas I could discuss here, and I chose a few that I'm most interested in. We have so many more priority areas. These are just a few. And I often pose this question to audiences: what's the next technology that's going to change the world that we couldn't possibly predict today? I get asked that question in talks like this. What is the technology that you cannot predict in the future? That job is mine. And obviously you can't predict that, but what we can do as a community is strategically and purposefully set up an environment where tech surprise occurs. Diversity of thought is critical in this pursuit, and increasingly multidisciplinary ideas on the margins, where we see unexpected innovation. I believe that the United States thrives on competition. And in order to compete, we cannot be static. We have to be ever evolving the collective capabilities of the Department of Defense, but also our partners, our allies, and others. In many cases, a collective effort across civil, commercial, and military sectors is a sidestep to symmetric technology development. And instead, it allows us to adapt creative applications to new concepts. Not all research hypotheses will lead to success. And we have to aim to cultivate a culture that destigmatizes failure. I have failed. And this is the only way, I argue, that we innovate. We have to encourage enterprise knowledge, sharing of lessons learned, and honest assessments. In general, the DoD can appear to be intrinsically motivated by risk avoidance, familiarity of solution, and predictability in process flows. I'm commenting on myself there. However, the innovation continues to be incubated by the passion, curiosity, and ambition of the people in this room and throughout our community. I promised I would focus on what next and what is possible, and so I very much look forward to hearing your ideas. I'm going to end with one of my favorite quotes, and it's this: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." That's Margaret Mead, and I look forward to working with all of you.